Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are looking at this. Right now, what you're seeing here is the actual chart that you will fill out, and it has different groups of people that settled Texas during this era of Mexican national identity. And so we're talking the people that came basically. There were people here before, then the Spanish came, and so around 1821, 18 to 1830 what was the way that how was Texas settled? Okay, so first thing you can do, I put this on mine. Your teacher may do it differently, um, where you can click this, then this will give you the information. So we go to present mode. Wait a second for this to come up. Okay, so I'm going to kind of talk you through this as if we were in class. Okay, give me a moment here for this to load up. Okay, how was Texas settled during the Mexican national era? So we're talking, like I said, Mexico declared its independence from Spain around 1821. And so it's a short period of time because Texas will eventually declare their own independence. But right now, we're talking about how Texas was settled during this era. So, who were the original inhabitants of Texas? Well, we've got the Caddo, the Comanche, the Karankawa, and the Humano. And we have others. We just use them as the representatives. And you can see there's a lot more. You've got the Wichita, the Tonkawa. So these are indigenous, just means the original people. We've referred to them in American history as Indians, Native Americans. But all that means is the original inhabitants. So they were the people here first, and then they were removed or forced off or different ways of being removed from their land. And that's where the colonizers came in. So it started with the Spanish colonizations we talked about in our last unit. The Spanish came from Europe. And they started colonizing Texas shortly after 1519 and made it part of New Spain. So as you can see, it's kind of a northern part on the northeast side of New Spain. So New Spain included a lot of the United States. I mean, the present United States, but at that time was not part of the United States. United States didn't really exist. Their reasons were they wanted gold, resources, and land, God, the spread of Christianity, which we talked about through missions, then the glory, maybe for the individual explorer, but that glory really talks about the rivalry that was happening in Europe at the time between Portugal to a small extent. They didn't really colonize much besides Brazil because they were not as powerful as the other countries in Europe. The big ones when you get to eighth grade are going to be France and Great Britain. At this time, though, Spain was a world power along with Great Britain and France. And so that they're sort of in a rivalry, and that's the glory part. Okay, so let's talk about the Anglo settlement of Texas. And Anglos we usually refer to as the people of European descent, the white people. And the Anglo settlement of Texas was mainly the German and Irish at this time. There'll be others later when we talk about Texas as its own republic and as part of the United States. So the Anglos came from Germany and Ireland. Germans were the largest European immigrant to settle Texas. Some famous people were Prince Karl of Solms-Braunfels, which you'll recognize that name, Braunfels. Frederick Ernst was probably known as the father of German immigration to Texas. John O. Musbach, and then Hewitson of Irish descent. They settled in central Texas, New Braunfels, Bernie, Fredericksburg. And like I said, here's a video of the first Germans to come. And you can kind of see this is the area. Remember, most of Texas was settled in this area at this time. Then the other Anglos that aren't talked about a lot are the Americans. So we've got Texas, you've got these original inhabitants, the Native Americans. They are forced off their land by the Spanish, and they start to convert these Native Americans. And now all of a sudden, as you learned earlier this week, the impresario system, which are really just land grants, we start getting Anglos to come to this area. And you can kind of see the impresario system here on this map of different ones. There's more than just this one, but here's Hewitson, the Irish one, McMullen, another Irish person. And then you've got some of these people from, like I said, Moses Austin, Stephen S. Austin, easy for me to say, Moses Austin, Stephen F. Austin, and Green DeWitt. These are all Americans of Anglo that we would consider Anglos. They got free land, as we learned about in the National Colonization Law last week, and they wanted economic opportunity. You got land. Some established large farms to grow cash crops and brought slaves with them, which will be an issue because Mexico outlawed slavery. So the Anglos that came were from Europe, Germany, and Ireland for the most part. And then we had the Americans who are coming to Texas as technically immigrants because it was not part of America then. Now, who else was either already there or also immigrated to Texas? Well, most people that identified as Mexicans were still living south of Texas. That's why they wanted to bring in the Anglos to help settle it. So Mexico officially settled Texas after the revolution in 1821. So the Mexican Revolution, they leave this area known as New Spain and they create a new country called Mexico. They had political and economic reasons for settling Texas. The political reason was to protect Mexico City from Native American raids. And then they also had the obvious economic reasons, which is they wanted to create ranches, businesses, and agriculture in Texas. Probably the most famous impresario of Mexican descent was Martin de Leon, who founded Victoria, Texas. Okay. And then there's another group that's a little bit harder to put your finger on exactly who identifies as this and how it works. Well, the Tejanos were mostly the mestizos during this time. The mestizos are people of mixed ethnicity, of indigenous and not indigenous and Native American. I'll have to change this when I actually finish it here. I'll change it in a minute. It's mixed ethnicity of, let me change it right now, of indigenous and Spanish, because indigenous are Native American. So that didn't make any sense. And Spanish descent. Okay, let me go get this out of the way. Go back to present mode. Okay. See, we all make mistakes. Okay, so what you have is you have these Native Americans that were there. Then you have all these Spanish people that are living there with the Native Americans for 300 years. So they have lived in Texas from 1519 until the present day, although they cannot be considered indigenous because they're not Native Americans. They're not part of the Caddo, the Karankawa, the Comanche. So they're not really indigenous, but they view themselves as indigenous because they have been living there their whole lives. They were born and raised in Texas, and they are not Anglo, and they are not Native American. They're Tejano. Their ethnicity is mestizo, and they may identify themselves as Tejano. And certainly in our curriculum, we identify them as Tejanos. And so probably the easiest way to think of it is a lot of these folks will either identify as Mexican or as independents or maybe eventually American. Their most famous impresario is Juan Seguin. Here's an article that further explains mestizo culture. It's basically the mixed ethnicity of indigenous and Spanish descent, and they form their own group because they're a different shared history than the Native Americans, than the Spanish, or the Anglo Americans that come over, and so they're gonna kind of view the world in a little bit different way. Most of Mexico at that time, 1821 Mexico, the positions of power were held by Spanish folks that were Spanish descent, and so some of the Tejanos who were born and raised in the New World didn't appreciate that so much. So these are all the different groups that have come to the New World, or not the New World, but to Texas. And let me get out of this and go back to right here, the chart. So some of them I filled in for you. So we want to know where they came from. You could almost put, for Tejanos, I could put the Texas flag in this if I wanted to, and I probably will put that down. So just to kind of drive home the fact that they were kind of native Texans in many ways. And so you just have to fill out this chart and get this understanding. And it's most important that you understand these groups because they're going to come up bigger when we talk about the next unit, which is the Texas Revolution. So I want to thank you all for continuing to do your work, showing up at the Zoom sessions, and continue to keep working hard. And you're doing a great job so far. This assignment, what we want you to do is fill out the areas that have not been filled in for you. And that's about it. Have yourself a great day.